The Hospital That Refused to Discharge Its Dead Hollow Atlas, Episode 06. Narration script, The Archivist. Cold open 6 in the morning, February 15th, 1942. Captain Arthur Perkins, Senior Medical Officer of the Royal Air Force Hospital at Changi, Singapore, stood at the window of the surgical ward and watched the Union Jack come down over the city. He turned back to his patients. 43 men in beds, drips running, charts hanging at the foot of each cot. He picked up his clipboard and continued his morning rounds, because there was nothing else a medical officer could do in that moment. By 9 o'clock, the building was no longer a hospital. It was a detention facility. The patients were still in their beds. Here is what makes Old Changi Hospital remarkable, and the question this episode will attempt to answer. When the British RAF built it in 1935, they built it to save lives. When the Japanese military police took it over in 1942, they used it to end them. When the Civilian Health Authority reopened it after the war, they used it to deliver babies. The same corridors, the same wards, the same rooms. The hospital ran continuously for 62 years. In 1997, it closed overnight, with everything still inside. It has not been fully demolished. No official reason has been given for why. Act 1. What was built, the Royal Air Force Hospital Changi, was commissioned in 1935 as the premier medical facility for British forces in the Far East. Singapore at that point was the linchpin of British imperial power east of Suez. The naval base at Changi was described by the British government as an impregnable fortress. The hospital was built to match, permanent construction, generous proportions, designed to handle everything from tropical disease to surgical trauma. Building E was the centerpiece, a colonial block, 2 stories, thick walls, wide verandas designed to manage the equatorial heat. The architectural language was institutional British, the same logic as a hospital in Manchester or Edinburgh, transposed into tropical conditions. Ceiling fans, louvered shutters, a covered walkway connecting the wards. It served its function for 6 years without incident. The RAF maintained it meticulously. Medical records were kept in duplicate. Staff rotated on standard postings. The hospital treated malaria, injuries, surgical cases, the ordinary medical demands of a garrison force. Then Singapore fell. Winston Churchill called it, in those exact words, the worst disaster and largest capitulation in British history. 80,000 British and Allied troops surrendered to a Japanese force of around 30,000. The logic of the impregnable fortress collapsed in 70 days. The hospital was handed over intact, equipment in place, records in filing cabinets, medicine in the pharmacy. The Japanese military police, the Kempeitai, took occupation within 48 hours. The building that had been built to maintain life became, almost immediately, a place where life was taken. Pattern interrupt. There is a specific document that records what happened at Old Changi Hospital during the occupation, and it is not a ghost story. It is a war crimes tribunal transcript. The Kempeitai used the hospital complex for the interrogation of civilian prisoners. This is documented. It is in the National Archives of Singapore, the Imperial War Museum in London, and the records of the post-war Allied Military Tribunal in Singapore. The methods used are documented. The names of some of the victims are documented. The names of several of the perpetrators are documented. On October 10th, 1943, a date known in Singapore as the Double 10th, 57 civilians were arrested. The charges were espionage. Most of them were interned civilians, British nationals, administrators, traders, missionaries. They were brought, in part, through this building. At least 8 were executed. 15 more died in detention from injuries sustained during interrogation. The tribunal records describe the specific methods used in the interrogation rooms. These records are available to researchers. They are not classified. They are simply not well known. The building that delivered this outcome was the same building that had been designed to treat illness. Act 2. The record of what happened. The double 10th was not the beginning, and it was not the end. From February 1942 to August 1945, the Kempeitai operated in and around the Changi complex. The hospital building served multiple functions, some medical, some not. The post-war tribunal established that prisoners were held in the facility. The tribunal established that interrogations occurred in the facility. The precise number of deaths directly attributable to the hospital location specifically, as opposed to the broader Changi detention system, is not definitively established. What is established is what happened on the day the war ended. August 15th, 1945. Japan surrendered. The Kempeitai departed. They left the building in approximately the state they had found it, with the addition of certain items that had not been there when the RAF departed, and the absence of certain records that had been. The British returned. Medical staff were among the first Allied personnel back into Singapore. The hospital at Changi was assessed, cleaned, and reopened. This is the detail that is rarely stated plainly. The wards that had been used for detention and interrogation were cleaned, repainted, and returned to medical use. The building resumed its function as a hospital. Patients were admitted, surgeries were performed, and from the mid-1950s onward, the maternity ward operated continuously. Babies were born in that building. Healthy living babies, in a building where the records showed what had previously occurred in the same corridors. The hospital served the civilian population of Singapore for 52 years after the war. It became unremarkable. It became simply the hospital at Changi, overcrowded by the 1980s, aging, due for replacement. Consider that span of time carefully. The generation of nursing staff who trained at Old Changi Hospital in the 1960s had no personal memory of the occupation. They did not clock in each morning with the wartime history consciously present. They were nurses in a hospital doing nursing work. The institutional memory of what the building had been between 1942 and 1945 was present in the records, in the tribunal documents, in the accounts of those old enough to remember, but not in the daily experience of staff walking the same corridors. That is how institutions absorb their own histories, not by confronting them, but by continuing to function over them. The nursing staff of the 1970s, 80s and 90s were separated from the double 10th by 30 to 40 years, a lifetime, a complete institutional turnover, and still the building was the same building, the same corridors, the same wards, Building E standing exactly as it had in 1943. In 1997, the new Changi General Hospital opened 3 kilometers away. The old hospital was officially decommissioned. The closure happened over a matter of days. Staff transferred. Administrative records were moved. But the physical contents of the wards, the beds, the monitors, the medical equipment, the patient charts, the files, were left. This is documented in the decommissioning records and corroborated by photographic evidence from explorers who entered the building in the years following closure. Baby cribs in the maternity ward, lined up, unwashed, as though the ward had simply paused mid-morning and never resumed. Medical charts at the foot of beds, the last entries still visible, dates in the mid-1990s. Medicine bottles in the pharmacy, some still labeled, some still sealed. The decommissioning rationale, when asked about by journalists, was logistical. The hospital was closing to make way for redevelopment of the site, and removing decades of accumulated equipment and furniture would require resources the authority did not want to allocate. There was also an asbestos consideration in the older blocks, which made selective removal complicated. In 2001, the Straits Times published a piece drawing on interviews with former nursing staff. 2 nurses, interviewed independently, described the same thing. Footsteps in the corridor outside Ward 14, always in the same direction, always toward the same room. Both described this occurring during night shifts, both in the period between 1985 and 1995, before the hospital closed. Neither had spoken to the other about it before the interview. Ward 14 is adjacent to Building E. Act 3. What remains? Building E is still standing. The Singapore government has proceeded with partial demolition of the site over the years since 1997. Several of the newer annex blocks have been brought down. The site has been regraded. Plans for redevelopment have been proposed multiple times, and multiple times, the full demolition of Building E specifically has not proceeded. No official explanation for this has been published. The building is not listed as a heritage structure. It is not formally protected. It simply has not been demolished. Photographs from 2010 show the butterfly murals in the children's ward still intact, yellow and orange, hand-painted directly onto plaster, the style suggesting the 1960s or 70s. A parent or a nurse painted those for children who were patients. The paint was still adhering to the wall 13 years after the last child was admitted. There is a specific quality to murals in abandoned institutions that is worth pausing on. A mural in a children's ward is painted for the children. It is an act of consideration. Someone decided that the visual environment of a sick child mattered, that the effort was worth making, that butterflies on plaster would be seen and would help. When the hospital closed and the children stopped coming, the mural continued to exist. The butterflies continued to be painted on the wall in the dark, in an empty room. The consideration did not stop being real simply because its intended recipients were no longer present. This is, in miniature, the argument about the building itself. The intent that built it, the RAF intent to treat the wounded, did not disappear when the use changed. The function changed. The structure remained. The Changi Museum, the official military history museum adjacent to the former POW camp, covers the occupation period in detail. The double 10th is documented there. The names of the victims are on record. There are exhibits about the civilian internees, the interrogation methods, the post-war tribunal. The hospital itself is not part of any official heritage trail. It is not referenced in the Changi Museum's permanent collection. It is simply a building that stands on government land, awaiting a decision that has not been made. Singapore's relationship with its wartime past is complex and carefully managed. The official narrative of the occupation, the fall of the fortress, the humiliation, the POW camps, the resistance, the liberation, is documented and memorialized in official spaces. The Changi Museum handles this well.